There would be no Olympic Games without him, but who is Baron Pierre de Coubertin? On the eve of the 2024 Paris Olympic Games, I'm going to take you back to the same city more than 100 years ago. In 1894 at the Sorbonne University, this Frenchman, an aristocrat, an educationalist, and a man who believed the ancient Olympic Games could be revived to bring about world peace, laid out his plans for a modern Olympic Games. Wars break out, he said, because nations misunderstood each other. We shall not have peace until the prejudices which now separate the different races shall have been outlived. To attain this end, what better means than to bring the youth of all races periodically together for amiable trials of muscular strength and agility? Today we're going to speak to two experts on Baron Pierre de Coubertin, both with very different views on the man. This is just a snapshot of what they think. If you'd like to hear their full interviews, please feel free to subscribe to the Sports Ambassador podcast on Patreon. Well, George, great to talk to you. I did see you at the Olympic Roundtable during the week, and I found that discussion rather fascinating. But what about your relationship with Baron Pierre de Coubertin? Because it seems to me almost like you have embraced this idea that you almost embody him now, you channel him. And you give his perspective on so many things if he were in the modern era. So tell me where your relationship with him started.
Thank you, Tracy, first of all, for asking for the interview and for focusing on my particular story. In 1989, I was hired to write Atlanta. At the very end of '88, I was hired to write Atlanta's Olympic bid, and I was dispatched with a designer, Brad Copeland, over to Lausanne to study Olympic history and see how you built the communication structure for a bid campaign, and particularly how you do bid books, how you did what the bid books were, and how you put them together. And I was 15 minutes into the library. And I opened an old set of bid books. Looking at it, I saw a picture of a mustachioed old man with a headline above it that said something like Baron Pierre de Coubertin created the Olympic movement as part of a movement to bring the world together in friendship and peace through sport. I mean, that's literally what it conveyed. And I said to my buddy, I said, "Oh my God, Brad, this isn't just a sporting event, it's a movement." Mm-hmm. And I had been an anti-war protester in the 60s. And I had marched, I was at Richard Nixon's inauguration protesting that. I was marched in the big moratorium. And then my brother went to Vietnam and got shot. He recovered and came home. As he likes to say, he recovered physically. But I was a peace advocate. And I got into the advertising business and moved to Atlanta from Philadelphia in the 1970s and thought I had left the peace movement behind. And then I felt like peace had come calling again.
So, Philip, great to have you here. And, now that we're talking about the sort of 100-year anniversary for the Paris Olympic Games, it's just around the corner. Many people are now harking back to the founder, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who was a Frenchman. And there are different stories about the man. What's your perspective on the type of personality that he was?
Well, Coubertin was obviously a very forceful personality to drive this whole thing through. He had a sort of cataclysmic experience in many respects when he was a young boy. The Franco-Prussian War devastated France, and somehow this had an effect on his psyche, and he wanted to, the phrase that's used in French, rebronzer, make bronze, make healthy again, France. And he'd been inspired by reading a translation of Tom Brown's School Days and seen what the British had done at their public schools, that is to say, fee-paying schools. And eventually he went to rugby and Eton to try and see for himself, and was inspired by what they did to try and revive the Olympic Games. So he clearly was very, very driven. There were lots of things that he did that are very laudable. In fact, the Olympic Games, most of all, because this is a spectacle that delights and enthralls us every 4 years. But he also had flaws.
Being?
Well, the flaw is his consistent attitude to women, amongst other things. Now, apologists will say that he was born in the 19th century when women were very much considered to be almost second-class citizens. But if you look at his writing throughout his life, he never wavered from his conviction that women shouldn't really be part of the Olympics. And over the years that he was in charge of the Olympic movement, and it was for the best part, effectively, of 30 years, although he wasn't president for all of that time, he was the controlling force. And when he set up the IOC at the Sorbonne University in Paris, he was very canny about who he invited. And he talked of having elbow room, which is to say that he included a lot of people who never attended meetings because he wanted to be the one controlling the way that the movement went on. And in 1912, for example, the Stockholm Olympics, one of the first great celebrations of the Olympic Games, they brought in modern pentathlon, which was his idea. And women were starting to take part in the games, though in very, very small numbers, very restricted. And somebody had written in, a woman had written in to ask to take part in the modern pentathlon. And rather dismissively, he described her as a neo-Amazon, and then wrote to Christian Hellstrom, the organizer of the organizing secretary of 1912, and basically emphasized, well, you do what you want, but I'm against it. I don't think it's a good idea. I personally am opposed to the admittance of ladies in Olympic competition. An Olympiad with females would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and improper. Now, this was written in the official report, but a lot of people think that he was the author behind that. So, you know, that was his attitude in the early years, and there weren't many women taking part. I mean, in Paris, you had golf and tennis, very few competitors, only golf in 1904. 1908, you had a bit of archery as well and some tennis, but nothing in the mainstream sport of athletics until 1928. So, you know, that meant that the showpiece of the games was excluding women right up until that time. And it's right through Coubertin's watch, if you like, that women were not allowed to take part in the showpiece stadium event of athletics.